Hi guys, this is Dr. TS, and today we're going to continue Module 6 by talking more specifically about organelles. If you remember, organelles are these small functional units of a cell. So each of the organelles are going to serve a specific function to the cell. So I'm going to walk through the different organelles that we want you guys to understand in this class. And I'm going to talk to you about their function, what they look like, and where they are found. Making sure you understand what is going into a cell is going to be really important as we start to learn more about specific cellular processes. So the first type of organelle I'm going to talk about is the nucleus. And remember, whether or not a cell has these membrane-bound organelles, and specifically a nucleus, is one of the defining features of prokaryotes versus eukaryotes. And the primary function of the nucleus is this is where DNA is housed. Remember, DNA is our genetic material. This is our instruction manual for how to build us. So the nucleus is a membrane-bound, remember all organisms are membrane-bound, it has this nuclear membrane that only select materials can pass between, and we call this nuclear pores. There's like these little holes in the nucleus, nuclear pores, that allow some things to come in and out. There is also a region of the nucleus called the nucleolus, which is almost this like darker region. The nucleolus is going to be important in helping build something called ribosomes. It's just another kind of functional unit of the nucleus that has important functions. But the nucleus is kind of the command center of the cell. This is where all of the information starts. This is going to be, again, think about it, the command center. It's going to send information out to the rest of the cell of things to build and things to make in order to do cellular processes. The next major organelle I'm going to talk about are ribosomes. Now, ribosomes exist in both prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Ribosomes are these really cute tiny structures that consist of two subunits, a large subunit and a small subunit. And ribosomes build proteins. So you've learned so far that proteins are made up of amino acids, and ribosomes kind of read and get instructions from the nucleus. There's going to be instructions, genetic instructions that come out of the nucleus. And it's going to give the ribosome instructions on how to build proteins, and the ribosome is going to do just that. So the ribosome, when it's bound to these instructions, will build a protein. Now, there are kind of two major types of ribosomes that we see in a eukaryotic cell. The first are ribosomes that are going to be attached to an organ system called the rough endoplasmic reticulum. And then there's also free ribosomes that just kind of float in the cytoplasm, which is kind of just the liquid that's inside of a cell. So there's kind of two of these major groups, some on the rough endoplasmic reticulum, some that are floating more freely in the cytoplasm. So let's talk a little bit more about this endoplasmic reticulum. So the endoplasmic reticulum is going to be a builder. Okay, it's mainly where various molecules are made. So as I mentioned, the rough ER is going to be really important for making proteins. So the rough ER, the reason we call it rough is that there are a bunch of little ribosomes kind of studded in it that make it have this rough texture. So the rough endoplasmic reticulum is really essential in the building of proteins via these ribosomes that are kind of embedded in it. Additionally, we have the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. This is going to be where we build phospholipids and sterols. So remember, phospholipids are really important for the cell membrane. That's what the membrane is made out of. It's going to build other types of lipid molecules. It's important in carbohydrate metabolism, which just means that this is a place where carbohydrates can go to be broken down or built up. Is important in detoxing the cell, so getting rid of waste products. And it also stores things like calcium, which is, remember, an element that's going to be really, really important in cell function. So both of these things are going to be important for building things. The rough endoplasmic reticulum builds proteins, and the smooth endoplasmic reticulum builds lipids and sterols. The next organelle I want to talk about is the Golgi apparatus. So the Golgi is a really, really fascinating organelle in that it helps build, modify, sort, and ship materials. I want you to think of this as like a processing facility. Right? So the Golgi makes polysaccharides, so it makes these carbohydrates that our cell uses. It modifies proteins and lipids, so it will add functional groups to lipids and proteins. It will cut amino acid chains into smaller chains. It's really going to be modifying and getting these things ready. And then it sorts and ships things out. So again, as lipids and proteins kind of come into the Golgi, they're put into little packages and then sent out to either outside of the cell or within the cell in order to get to its specific destination. So kind of thinking as a processing, shipping facility. So what you'll notice is a lot of these organelles are going to have similar functions to each other, and that is because these organelles all work together. So for example, let's think about the process of taking something from genetic information into being sent out outside of the cell. So pretty much, for example, right, if we think of our nucleus as our command center, okay? It's going to send instructions out. It's going to say, okay, I need you to build this protein. And so the DNA will get made into RNA, which will then get sent through the endoplasmic reticulum where the protein will be built. Then that protein might get sent to the Golgi apparatus where it is edited and modified and then packaged to get sent to another part of the cell. So all of these organelles work together to help create and keep a functioning cell all together. The same can be said for the the smooth ER, right? If a lipid is made into smooth ER or a carbohydrate, that then gets sent to the Golgi where it will be modified and then sent off to wherever it needs to go. So often these organelle systems work together in order to maintain the cell as a whole. The next organelle I want to talk about is one that you guys are probably very familiar with, and this is the mitochondria. This often gets the nickname the powerhouse of the cell. If you go up to anyone on the street and you say, give me a biology fact, they're going to say to you, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. So what do you think it does? It makes energy production. And the scientific terminology for what it does is something called cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is the term that we use when we talk about making energy in the mitochondria. And you guys are going to learn all about this in our next unit. So the cell is able to take and make energy, right? So cellular respiration, we need energy to do things. We need energy to build proteins. We need energy to make lipids. We need energy to modify them. Every single thing that our cell does requires energy. And so the mitochondria exist in the cell in order to make that energy. So they take energy from a carbohydrate and they break it down and make it into something usable. And a lot of cells can have multiple mitochondria, and I'll talk a little bit about that at the end of today's lecture as well. But it's the powerhouse of the cell. It is their energy producing factory. Kind of in the same vein is something called a chloroplast. Now, chloroplasts are only found in plant cells for the most part. So we do not have chloroplasts in our cells. Chloroplasts are what make plants green. And this is where a process called photosynthesis takes place. So plants are able to take energy from the sun, so light energy, and turn it into carbohydrates like glucose. And then we eat those plants and we get that energy. So chloroplasts are another energy producer. They just do it through a process called photosynthesis. And not all types of cells are going to have chloroplasts. Another type of organelle that's going to be important in a cell is something called a lysosome. This is like our garbage man. This is going to help break down materials. So the inside of these lysosomes, so it's like a little membrane-bound organelle, right? There's a membrane around it. And inside that lysosome are digestive enzymes. Remember, enzymes are proteins that do chemical reactions. So if you think about these enzymes doing chemical reactions, they're digestive, they're going to be breaking apart molecules. So this compartment will help break down old cell components, right? If I have a ribosome that just isn't working anymore, it might get absorbed in the lysosome and broken down, and then parts of it can be recycled for other things in the cell to use. So it helps waste, it gets rid of, if you have a bacterial infection or a viral infection, it helps get rid of that foreign material. And it can also help aid in what we call programmed cell death. So one of the things that cells are actually capable of doing is something called apoptosis, which is when a cell is super unhealthy, it can commit kind of this programmed cell death and get rid of itself before other cells become unhealthy. So lysosomes are our garbage man, our recycler. They take and break down old material or foreign material to keep the cell happy and healthy. Another type of organelle that we see is called a vacuole. And these are primarily storage. We see a lot of these in plant cells additionally. So for example, in plants, they have this thing called the central vacuole, which holds a lot of excess water, right? So plants need a lot of water because they're using that water to make energy. And so it's a kind of a storage area for that excess water, helps provide structure and support to the cell as well. The last type of organelle I want to talk about is what we call the cytoskeleton. So this is kind of a general term for multiple different components. There's lots of different things that make up the cytoskeleton. But the cytoskeleton, think skeleton. It is providing structure and movement to the cell. So some cells are shaped in different ways, and a big part of that is the cytoskeleton. So it's a bunch of different kind of thin fibers that reinforce the structure and also provide almost a road for the rest of the cell. So for example, if I want to get something from the nucleus all the way to the mitochondria, then I can follow along on the cytoskeleton and end up where I need to go. So the cytoskeleton provides both the physical structure of the cell and also a roadway system for all of the things in our cell to move along. Now, as I mentioned, not all cells possess all organelles. So I've kind of separated the cells into kind of major groups. So we have animal cells, plant, fungal, and protists. These are our eukaryotes. Eukaryote, and bacteria are a prokaryotic cell. So of course the prokaryote is going to have none of these membrane-bound organelles. The only thing that the prokaryotic cell has that the rest have is the ribosomes, okay? Animal cells have pretty much everything except for chloroplast. Our animal cells cannot do photosynthesis, and only some animal cells have the vacuole. Plant cells don't have lysosomes, but they have everything else. Fungal cells don't have chloroplasts, and so on and so forth. And so different types of cells are going to possess different organelles. Additionally, organelle quantity is going to be tied directly to cell function. So some cells, specifically in our body, might have more of an organelle than another. And so one classic example of this is the mitochondria, right? Mitochondria make energy. So we want cells that use a lot of energy to have more mitochondria. So for example, heart cells have a ton of mitochondria in them. Our heart is a muscle that is constantly working and working and working, so it needs energy. It needs a lot of mitochondria. The liver is also another high energy organ system that is really important in lipid production and waste and kind of helping our body sort through different things. So it needs a lot of energy. Our muscle cells, right, movement of our skeleton is going to require a lot of energy. On the flip side, our red blood cells have no mitochondria at all. And this is because red blood cells transport oxygen. And as you will learn later in this course, oxygen is really important to make energy. And so if red blood cells had mitochondria in them, all of that oxygen would get used up And so the red blood cells don't have any mitochondria, so that they can easily transport oxygen to other cells that need it, to then be used by the mitochondria to make energy. So again, not every cell type has all the organelles. Not all cells have the same amount of organelles in them, and it's really going to be down to what is the purpose of the cell, what function does it have. And so as you start to study these organelles, think about what type of cell might need more of a smooth ER than another, what type of cell might need more mitochondria than another, why don't animal cells have chloroplasts, and that kind of thing. So really start thinking about how these organelles are going to be contributing to the function of the overall cell. And we'll see these organelles come up over and over again as we start to learn more about specific cellular processes. Thank you, guys.